Hello there. A warm welcome and many thanks to you for listening to this Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary in which I, Toby Haydoke, watch a Doctor Who story and see if I can identify my special guest's favourite things about each episode.
Hi Toby, I'm Steve Lyons. I'm a writer of Doctor Who and some other stuff, and I would like to challenge you to watch the Sensorites all the way through. Now, I've chosen this story because I'm a big fan of the first season of Doctor Who. I think this is the weakest story in it, but watching it again recently, I found a few things to love about it, and hopefully you can too.
Did you hear that? Steve Lyons there, Doctor Who writer in various mediums, has not opened with a eulogy to the story of his choice, but with a challenge. And isn't that the Sensorites, the poor old Sensorites, all over? Even the person who has championed it for Happy Times and Places has said it is they think it is the weakest story of the season. And let's be honest, this is definitely, well, certainly anecdotally for me, the story that most people, when they say, oh, I started a Doctor Who marathon, and I think that the place where, on average, most people give up or stumble or falter during an enthusiastic canter through Doctor Who in order from the very beginning is as early as the Sensorites. It certainly poses a challenge to people. For me, it has always had a reputation of being, yes, definitely the weakest of the season, or the one it was okay to be slightly underwhelmed by. I come from a time where every Doctor Who story was marvellous, apart from the gunfighters. I mean, you could maybe be, slightly down on the Underwater Menace, the Space Pirates, and Invasion of the Dinosaurs, but the only one you could really hate was the gunfighters. But yeah, the Sensor Android Invasion was I think seen as an anomaly in an otherwise classic run of Hinchcliffe's. I think that was certainly acknowledged. I'm talking around the time of the Five Doctors here, when Doctor Who's history was being written for the first time, and certainly digested for the first time by people like me. But there was a whiff of something underwhelming about the Sensorites, although there was an acknowledgement that, but hey, it's making a breakthrough because it's showing for the first time that Doctor Who monsters aren't all evil. In fact, I remember a young man being at a party that my mum had organised for some work people or something, and he'd said something like, he was well into Doctor Who, and he liked it because all the monsters were bad. And I said something precocious like, well, actually, except for the Sensorites in 1964 who were good. And his mother sort of said rather disdainfully, well, you can know too much, Now, she was putting me down because I'd contradicted her son, probably in, as I say, a fairly precocious way. But also, I had a mind to people coming into my house and saying they were big Doctor Who fans. Well, what they meant was that they'd just watched some of the latest episodes. But I don't think anyone comes out of that anecdote very well. Ha 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 ha. Because, she shouldn't have put down a child, especially not for knowing too much. But, I should have checked my privilege, I think, as they say these days. Anyway, I share that anecdote simply to point out that even that early, you know what, I don't think I'd seen the Sensorites at that point. But I was, I was displaying knowledge of something I was fully aware of without actually having experienced it myself. Oh dear, the internecine wranglings that we have as Doctor Who fans. Sometimes the internecine wrangling takes place within our own psyche. Listen to me remonstrating with my former self, which is something that nobody else in the world needs to have known about it, but I've shared it in order to show the ups and downs of my fan experience, and the fact that no matter how much wisdom and even-handedness I try to impart in these podcasts, I am prey to the sins of the flesh and social transgressions that all of we Doctor Who fans should be aware that we commit, probably on an almost daily basis, which is why we are rightly I think regarded with a certain disdain by normal people. Anyway, hello all of us who I've just been rude about. I hope you're having a lovely time. So I'm interested to see if the rest of you are entering the world of the Sensorites with as much trepidation as I mean, I feel warmly towards it, actually, because it's a story of great importance to me, because when it was scheduled to be on the DVD releases, I had an idea. I had a rare idea. There were a few producers who'd got hold of the list of what was coming up and had been asked to pitch ideas, and I came up with an idea of doing a sort of Who Do You Think You Are, but about Peter R. Newman and Mervyn Pinfield, the writer-director combo who had never been interviewed because they'd both died before fandom got its hands on started to get its hands on people, and fandom got people quite early. There are people like Peter Blahatsky and Brian Hales and all sorts of people who were got fairly early on. But Newman, well, we didn't really know about Newman. He was a mystery, and Pinfield we knew had definitely sort of died in the mid-60s. And finally that got. It went through a few different hands, and finally Chris Chapman was the guy who was going to be doing basically most of the stuff, and certainly the stuff on this particular release. So I mentioned that idea to him, and he narrowed it down and said, well, we know a bit about Pinfield, and let's just focus on one guy. And we did the documentary that eventually came, Looking for Peter. And if you've not seen that, I still think it's the documentary I'm most proud of, just because of what it represents, that we answered a question that nobody knew going in. Nobody buying that disc knew the information on that documentary. Quite often, I think, as Doctor Who fans, we watch documentaries and it kind of tells us sort of what we know. We might have an anecdote here or an observation there that we weren't fully aware of, but there are no sort of breakthroughs of breaking of stories, if you like. And this answered a question that people had tried and failed to answer, and it also, I think, it had a humanity about it that I think is as important actually as the answer that we found. We hit upon a style that ties in with my desire to sort of know the people even from beyond the grave, and it was a lovely piece, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out. And Richard Bignell and Chris deserve a lot of the credit for that. But it was my idea, so that's the one thing I've done. That's one thing I can say I've actually done for the world of Doctor Who, and so I have a soft spot for the Sensorites, which was almost immediately rubbed out by the fact that I also did the commentary on that. And having done this great documentary, we said, well, that's good, because we're not going to repeat anecdotes, because we haven't done a making of. We've done a commentary, and God, we've got such a good lineup as well. We got pretty much everyone that was alive, apart from Ken Tilson, who plays first Sensorite and various other Sensorites, who was just a little bit too far away, sort of Cumbria way, I think, and couldn't do the travelling. And I'd always intended to go and visit Ken and chat to him, but sadly he passed away before I could make proper contact. And Ilona Rogers, who I have interviewed via Skype all the way over to New Zealand, and that was a real achievement as well, because I just took it upon myself to get in touch with her agent, Gail, and to my huge surprise, we sort of hooked up via Skype and had a lovely old time, which really surprised me, because I'd assume if she'd been that easily up for it, somebody would have interviewed her before. Maybe they had, but I hadn't come across one, and we didn't get her for the DVD or anything. Just deemed it too impractical, I think. Nowadays, of course, we'd do that over Zoom, but Zoom hadn't been invented then. But that commentary, which I went into with lots of great big ideas, because we'd got such a smorgasbord of different talent and such an array of people, was really hard work. And I might talk about that during the commentary. I notice I've already got 8 minutes into this introduction, and I'm going to run out of things to say about the Sensorites during the episode, so why am I wasting your time and mine with this preamble that has gone on way too long? But I just context, I think, to sort of set up that the Sensorites is one that's always had a slightly sort of ropey reputation, and I think I've struggled with as a viewer as well, but we'll see the ups and downs as we go along. But also that I have a weird sort of connection to. But even as I find something to sort of love about it, in one hand, it's sort of wrested away from me with or from the other. However, that metaphor's meant to turn out, and I sort of lost my way. But anyway, let's see how we go. Let's come on, Toby. Give yourself a chance here, because there's not a lot to talk about with the Sensorites, so let's talk over the episodes. But I'm amused that Steve, who I thought, because normally people start this by going, hey, listen up, I love this story, and there's going to be loads of great reasons. Whereas Steve has actually said, this one's going to be tricky, let's put you to the test. Although he has admitted there that he did find some stuff last time he watched it. So let's see how we go. We're going to begin on the iPlayer with episode 1, Strangers in Space of the Sensorites, which we're going to press play on in 3, 2, 1. So yes, I mean, I can't remember when I first saw this. It was a period when it wasn't a story I was in a hurry to collect, but after my initial sort of collectings and experiences of Doctor Who episodes, I then got to know some fan mates who had everything, and so they they just lent me stuff as and when. So it was in those days of borrowing mates' VHSs, and I'd certainly was very familiar with the imagery of it because it was in the Doctor Who book, Doctor Who the Early Years, which had so many of those brilliant, large Raymond P. Cusick photographs, which made this story look rather good. In fact, I bought a still from this story from John McElroy's photographs at a Doctor Who convention, because it's it's rather a scratchy photo, but the two Sensorites sort of clasping their heads, frightened of the noise, and it was just such a great image that I bought it, even though I had no particular tie to the story at that point, and I haven't got many pictures. I've got one of Patrick Troughton's salamander and one from the Sensorites, and that's about it. I used to quite often compile lists of photographs that John McElroy advertised in Doctor Who magazine, and fantasized about buying them, but never quite could justify the expense, and never did. I'm glad I didn't now, because it's just a way of seeing images from stories that one couldn't see moving pictures of, but anyway, those were the days where just a still would be enough to, make you really excited, even though the story existed in full in vaults you thought you'd never get access to. And now I'm watching it on iPlayer, and anybody else can. I used to get very cross with this bit, because it's like, come on, get the story started. This is. I used to think this is about 5 minutes, and I don't think it even is. It's probably just a couple of minutes of time with the TARDIS crew. As a young fan, I knew the TARDIS crew. I wanted this stuff out of the way so I could meet the new characters. But I've very much learnt to enjoy the company of the regulars much more now that I'm not discovering anything about the stories, because I've seen them all. So the guest characters are, familiar to me. The new territory is familiar to me. The new performances are familiar to me. So I can actually bask in the lovely chemistry this quartet have, and not object to that rather fun little banter they have about previous adventures, including throwing a parson's nose, which is an unseen adventure prior to Ian and Barbara. This is going to be hard-pressed not to be the best bit of the episode. The wonderful moment. Mervyn Pinfield, often denigrated as a director for being a bit old-fashioned. He was the executive producer, the associate producer of Doctor Who, there to offer technical assistance, but I think is always seen as a rather unambitious and, a director, unlike the Young Turks, the Christopher Barrys and Richard Martins and Dougie Camfield next season, pushing the boundaries and learning their trade. Mervyn Pinfield's been around since the dawn of time, and is always seen as rather unambitious, but it's the only time, isn't it, in the classic series where we actually have the camera follow the characters from the TARDIS into the set that they end up, and then you very cleverly have us cut back and Susan shutting the doors, and it's the exoskeleton, the external part of the police box. That's a virtuoso piece of directing, and and unique, a one-off. And here we have a lovely mystery straight away. One, it's helped by Norman Kaye's rather gorgeous, rumbling incidental music. This is his last bash, isn't it? He did the very first story, he did the Keys of Marinus, and now he's on the Sensorites, and all his scores have a similarity about them. I think you can identify that it's him, and that the non-winding time, says Hartnell there, he means non-winding type. and it was slightly an over the top musical sting when they discover or believe they discover that Carol and Captain Maitland are dead. But this, I love the way that this mystery sets up. The characters walk onto this mysterious, silent ship. They find a couple of dead people, but now the mystery. So first of all, you go, who are they and why are they dead? Then you go, oh, hang on, they're only just dead. But this is pretty sort of grim and spooky and scary. And they are quite pragmatic, aren't they? They're dead. Let's go off. Nothing we could do here. And here we have another mystery layered on. So we've landed. I mean, the cliffhanger from last week wasn't that great, was it? We've landed inside something, and I seem to recall, isn't it? At the end of the Aztecs, they have a sort of, yes, we've landed on something or inside something, says Barbara, and the Doctor goes, and you go, and that's the cliffhanger, okay. And unless it's you're Jonah and it's the whale, it'd be fine to land inside something. But anyway, they had to segue from one story to the next on a cliffhanger, and sometimes it's just a sort of a random moment like that. I love Barbara, even the way she tells him that Carol's dead is sweet and caring and sort of maternal and looky after-y. But that's the first mystery. We've landed inside something. Oh, it's a spaceship. It's a spaceship with unconscious people. Oh no, they're dead people. Oh no, they're dead people who aren't actually dead. I love that. That's a really nice piece of mystery, and it gives this story a sort of slightly creepy aspect. Captain Maitland is from the sort of series that Doctor Who could have been, where people talk to each other like they're slightly educating them. I'm Captain Maitland from space. I think he was Canadian, Lorne Cassette, or he ends up in Canada anyway. I think he was Canadian, and Ilona Rogers is from New Zealand. So an attempt here to make the crew, even though they're not using their actual accents, but there's a melting pot of talent from all over the world here, even in Doctor Who's very first season. Ilona Rogers was great. I was so surprised when she agreed to be interviewed. It was in the early days of Who's Round, and because we'd had everybody for the commentary bar Ken Tilson, who I'd meant to write to, but for some reason I started targeting people in Australia quite early on, or New Zealand, so I contacted Vic Reiterlis from Dalek's Master Plan and Lewis Fyander from Nightmare of Eden, because I'd worked out a way that I could call people on Skype and record it. So out of the blue, I just emailed Ilona Rogers' agent Gail, who got back to me and was really enthusiastic and really made it work. In fact, I was at Sarah Millican's house when I got the email from Gail, which was very, very exciting, because it was a hard time for me. I was going through a bit of a rough time personally, so I was a bit kind of lost, which is why I was staying at Sarah's that night, actually. And I think I'd wanted to get the one person we hadn't got on the commentary, and because we'd got everyone on the commentary bar Ken, I thought, well, let's go for Ilona, because we as I say, we couldn't get her on the physical media releases in those days because of the way that they were done. I'd hope that should it come to Blu-ray, we might be able to have a bash to set something up with her, because she was a great and game interviewee, and we kept in touch a little bit afterwards. I think she listened to one of my radio plays. This is beautifully spooky stuff. The music helps, I think. The lock looks like it's already come out, but and that's quite a fancy piece of kit. The Sensorite welder, or whatever it is. I've just watched Planet of the Ood, which is, I suppose, a companion piece to this, because it has been decided that the Sensorites and the Ood are from the same sort of genetic pool, or the same part of space. The Ood sphere, the Sense sphere, they're bald, benign-sounding sort of aliens. I think there's a commonality there, and that's been suggested, hasn't it? But we don't know they're benign yet. But they've taken the lock for the title. I like the little spark that comes out afterwards as well. And that's actually good manoeuvring from that sense right there, because he has to do it, but at a really peculiar angle, because if he did it how you'd normally do it, you'd be where the camera is. So he's having to sort of stretch round the camera to remove the lock at a peculiar angle. It's interesting, isn't it, though, that they kind of decide that they can't really help, so they bugger off. They spend a lot of time buggering off the initial TARDIS quartet. The caveman story ends with them basically running away from it. They, halfway through the Dalek story, they try to leave and only can't because of the fluid link shenanigans. And here they kind of go, well, okay, you're a bit trapped. Bye then. It's much more passive space travelling. Now, I love this bit, and that's partially because I think there was a UK Gold trailer for the Sensorites, which I saw sometime after I'd seen the story. And I remember this trailer, I think, which had bits from episode 1. It kind of ends with this bit, and it made me think, oh, the Sensorites actually looks much more exciting than I remember it being. And that's always the sign of a good trailer, where it sort of takes bits and builds you up for something more exciting, even than you remember it being when you experienced it. Because normally, of course, you see a trailer before you've actually seen the thing itself. And there's some nice lighting here. I love Hartnell with his glasses on. Oh yes, and they're sending something. They're sending something from the sense sphere. Oh yes, I was talking about this bit's a bit that they try hard with this, but it's not great. Where the poor actors sitting at the control panels have to sort of go, it's that button there that's, I mean, literally an inch away from my fingers, but you've got to do it, Doctor Who. Yeah, I'm not sure it's the best rendered sequence, but I think they're asking a lot. But Hartnell looks great in his glasses. Poor old Lorne Cassette as Captain Maitland is trying his hardest, but I have to say I don't think he's the finest. I'm not going to say he's not the finest actor that's been in Doctor Who at this point, because I don't know his work elsewhere, but he's certainly in Doctor Who not giving the best performance of season 1, shall we say, and perhaps actually almost one of the worst. And it's an odd part as well, because he's the sort of captain, but we actually don't see him after episode 3. He kind of vanishes with Barbara. I don't know. Oh dear, yeah, no, that's hard to do. And there's an advert break for foreign sales if we want one, with the fade to black. But yes, I was talking about Planet of the Ood, and I noticed that to make that seem a little futuristic, they'd done something to the sort of collars and ties, and they'd not made the futuristic costumes too funky, but just made a little nod to the fact that this was the future, and some lines and cuts might change. And I think by happy accident, there's a kind of similar thing going on here. They've got slightly big collars here, which I don't think are particularly 60s. I think they're going, this is the future where the collars are big, and the ties are now sort of like dog collars rather than dangly ties. It's and I suppose they're uniform as well, but you wear ties in a uniform. But anyway, it's a nice little a subtle attempt to suggest that tailoring has changed over the centuries. Although it is rather quaint, isn't it, that they've both got rockets on their jackets, as if to say, yes, we're from space. In case we forget what our job is, we just have to look at our chests. Oh yes, we're in a rocket. Because the thing about the future is when anything futuristic that you do, you will advertise through your clothing. And now we have another mystery thrown in, which is the question of John, who is spoken of but yet to be seen, and we're halfway through the episode. But there's something wrong with John. So there's something wrong with John. We've got this gloved hand that's removed the lock from the TARDIS. We've got these curious unseen creatures, the Sensorites. So I think it's a wonderfully atmospheric instalment, this, in spite of the fact that there are some problems with its static nature. Love that door sound. Love the hatch there, the door that goes up, the round hatch that there'll be a bit of stepping through, including at the end of the next episode. So it's nicely designed by the Ray of Sunshine. The Ray of Sunshine Cusick. Oh yeah. So this is we have another hand coming in at an angle where its possessor has to avoid the camera, which is where it would normally have stood to do that. And here is Stephen Dartnell. I always think it's quite funny in this period where there's William Hartnell, William Russell, William Hartnell, Stephen Dartnell. There's the letraset letters that they used for the closing titles will have been have an oversubscription of particular ones that occur in all of those names. But this is nicely lit. I think it's is it Howard King? I don't know. I'm not committing to that, but it's nicely lit. Famously, didn't they? They had to move quite slowly around this spaceship because it's quite a small set. But I think it's a good set, and we will see soon. There aren't many straight lines in this story, which gives it a nice visual motif. And I do really love being in the company of William Russell and William Hartnell and Jacqueline Hill and Carol Ann Ford. They've really all settled into their different roles. Ian is heroic, but he's not sort of stolid B movie. He is his hands in his pockets. He's a cool science teacher. And I'm aware that is slightly oxymoronic, and that's part of the charm. Is that he's cool in his own terms, but in our terms, that's rather quaint. He's cool in a cardigan. But I love that, and I think William Russell plays the part so well. And this is again we're still in the first episode. Instead, another layer of jeopardy is rolled on. We don't know what John's problem is. Stephen Dartnell looks rather stricken, bless him, but he's terrifying them. They're scared because we actually don't know what's going on. We don't know he's benign yet. He's been kind of set up as a bit of a threat, and actually a bit like the monsters later on. What we're scared of isn't necessarily what we should be scared of. And this is a bit of back and forth up and down a corridor, but it's well done, and they're acting their socks off. And I think there's been plenty of sort of incident and mystery, but mostly I think the most important thing that this episode succeeds on is its atmosphere. And Stephen Dartnell, I had the great pleasure of meeting. He was bald by then, and he'd been an actor that had kind of disappeared. I'd assumed he'd sort of stopped acting in the 60s because I hadn't seen his name on the telly or anything. And then he was there appearing in Hamlet with Mark Rylance for the Royal Shakespeare Company with, as the ghost of Hamlet's father, William Russell. It was the Sensorites and Keys of Marinus, because Stephen Dartnell plays Yartek in the Keys of Marinus, so he's no stranger to Doctor Who, but it's not the audience won't recognise him because he was entirely clad in rubber as Yartek, leader of the alien Vord, and that he was sort of joshed with this Hamlet that was done by the RSC, starring Dartnell as Horatio, which is odd casting because Horatio is normally a contemporary of Hamlet's, but Dartnell was much older than his Hamlet, so they'd obviously got a slightly different dynamic that they were aiming for. Horatio to the Hamlet of Mark Rylance, no less. So it's Mark Rylance, William Russell, Stephen Dartnell, Patrick Godfrey, who's in The Savages and The Mind of Evil, Sylvester Latouzel, who's in The Mind Robber. They were the Doctor Who people, but it also had Peter White in it as well. He's a wonderful actor who should have been in Doctor Who by now. He's in Russell T. Davies's The Second Coming. Oh, poor old John and Carol were going to get married, and this is sad. But because John is particularly mentally sensitive, it's damaged him a lot more. So John is damaged, and actually, what this turns out to be is quite a sweet look at mental disturbance. It's quite a sympathetic portrayal, because let's not forget, we think that neurological disorders are something very much of the modern era. This generation had just come out the back of World War II. It's just they talked about it a lot less, but there were all sorts of people with all sorts of difficulties, and madness was often a shorthand for badness or danger in television dramas. And I think this is quite a sort of sensitive portrayal, and it is with some credit to Stephen Dartnell, who I think's great and is nicely cast. And he was quite a slight sort of figure and fellow, but he was part of quite a political theatrical movement, and he'd been working in the theatre, but he was around, and I met him, and I have his autograph, but then he died. We don't even actually have a proper death date for him. So he was visible, but then he was on our radar, but he never did an interview for Doctor Who magazine. He died too early for the home video range. So I had a brief meet with him. I think we gave him a questionnaire, but no, we didn't. So no interview or anything. But he definitely, the company, including Mark Rylance, who came out of the stage door of the Grand Theatre Wolverhampton and chatted a little bit, but we weren't that interested in him because he'd never been in Doctor Who. But he sort of hung around and was chatty, and he was very amused that we were talking to Dartnell, and he looked at the pictures and he said, "Oh, is that the evil Yartek?" So it was obviously known amongst the company of that play that Dartnell was the evil Yartek in Doctor Who. So obviously William Russell had reminded him, or it had come up in conversation. It was obviously a sort of fondly enunciated thing, and that was rather jolly. I remember feeling that was rather fun, that Mark Rylance was tickled about the presence of the evil Yartek, and I think we dropped back in a few days later and gave him a picture and put underneath it, captioned it, "The evil Yartek." So he's been Yartek, and now he's John. So it's the show recycling its actors fairly early, which I know it does with monsters and things like that, but but Yartek's no small part, and it's a different director. So I don't know how that will have come about. It could have just been coincidence. Quite often when actors appear in close proximity in Doctor Who, you go, "Oh, is that because you'd done a story 2 stories early?" And it's just sometimes that they'd worked with both directors, and both directors fancied using them, and nobody really cared that they'd been in stories of such close proximity, and it was just a massive coincidence. But like, I think Richard Beale in The Ark, who's the voice of the Refusions, and then is in the Gunfighters, not that long afterwards. Total coincidence. It's nothing to do with the fact that he was in one and then he was in the other. He's in the Gunfighters because he knew Rex Tucker, who'd had, I think, no idea that he'd been used in the Ark, which he's used in for his voice. So sometimes we see patterns that aren't there. But what I love about this is that the Sensorites are mysterious, or to kill us, he says, and then the camera bumps into the thing, but that's okay. Hartnell doesn't flinch. Look at that. That's a beautiful image of the sort of stricken John. Has he done the bit, I might have talked through it, where he says something like, "You look like my sister," which just sort of comes from nowhere, which I think is really sweet. And I love the way that, now, people who would want to misread this to go, "Oh, look at the sexist 60s." The whole point of that scene is that John, broken, stricken, tragic John, is trying to be brave, and he says, "I'll protect you." And Barbara gives him that moment when she knows full well that he's no protection to them at all, but she is being decent and allowing him to feel that he's fulfilling that role. It's not to be taken on the surface reading. Quite often there's a lot of taken of drama on the surface reading, even these days, where people either willfully misrepresent something in order to find out what's wrong with it, or either writers are naughty or whatever. And I don't think that becomes us. And this, I think the way that I can sense them all around us, she says. Yeah, there's a real atmosphere to this whole thing. I think it's creepy. But I love the way that John says, and we have missed it, where he says, "You look like my sister." I think it's really sort of strange and offbeat and beguiling and rather sad, but rather sweet. This is great. It's gone completely silent. And it's trusting the actors' faces, and it gives Ian the moment to sort of walk round and be heroic and spot the cliffhanger as it happens. And I think it's quite creepy, isn't it? Because, yeah, look. And you get one hand and the other hand, and up comes Dr. Snuggles. But I like that mask, but we will have a different Sensorite next week, because it cannot be one of the actor Sensorites, because you would have to pay Joe Gregg or Ken Tilson, who play Sensorites 1 and 2. Not in that order, I think I've said them in 2 and 1. So that's, I think, Anthony Rogers as a non-speaking Sensorite, because then you don't have to pay him to be in the cliffhanger, which is why next week it's a different, and I have to say, shitter Sensorite. It's nothing, the reprise is nothing like as good. I actually rather like the cliffhanger, even though the aliens do look rather sweet and not scary. But I kind of like that. I like the fact that they're slightly strange and disconcerting, and the cliffhanger's not look at that scary beast. It's more, we've suddenly come face to face with these things that have up till now been an off-screen presence, and they've been set up as disturbing, but not physically disturbing. We know we haven't counted on them being scary or beclawed or giant. They mess with our minds. They are a danger to us mentally, and that's all been transmitted through the atmosphere and through the sound and their sort of ominous off-screen presence outside, and their approach, but from the they're coming towards the ship, but they've also been on the ship and cut us off from the TARDIS. And once again, in this early season, the TARDIS is sanctuary, so it's part of the writer's job to separate the travellers from the TARDIS, because that's part of the threat of any story, as we saw with Marco Polo particularly, but all of them actually, is that if you cannot get into the TARDIS, you cannot get home, and that is the driver. It is to get Ian and Barbara home, and if they're cut off from home, there's something, they are lost in space, that's a big element of the drama of these. We get a bit sort of glib now about the fact that companions can sort of live in their own house and just pop off with the Doctor every now and again. Not in those days. In those days, we'd been rent asunder. We'd been rent from 20th century Earth, and getting back there was not guaranteed, and certainly not something to be taken for granted. We weren't yo-yoing back and forth then. We were often just missing or totally cut off, and that's what's happened here. The Sensorites have cut us off from the spaceship, which is the beginning of a series of problems. So I think that episode is actually very, very nicely paced. I think it's beautifully atmospheric. I don't think it wastes time. I think that sort of chitter-chatter in the TARDIS when they have a little bit of a catch-up on adventures that they've had is fine, because we like that quartet and we like the dynamic between us, and it leads into a story that unfolds, I think, at a rather a nice pace. And even when we're having a little bit of back and forth and not much is happening, it's done with an sort of a slowness that seems to me to be deliberate and rumbling and atmospheric, and then it has that conclusion of we come face to face with the threat, but it's an odd looking threat, isn't it? It's an unusual, not particularly scary looking creature, but I think that piques our interest and our curiosity, and as I said, it promises that the story will start moving forward, because now the talked about Sensorites are seen and will be engaged with. So I think that is a great episode. I think it does not seem like the opening instalment of the weakest story of the season, and in fact I think it's a better opening instalment than certainly the opening instalment of the Keys of Marinus, which production wise is an absolute dog's dinner. It's a nightmare. Edge of Destruction is a great exercise in atmosphere, but I think because this has more characters and sort of a more of the promise of more story, I think it's certainly ahead of that too in terms of opening installments of stories of season 1. So this has a lot of promise, and I think it's nicely done, atmospherically done. The acting is it's not a consistent ensemble. Lorne Cossette is poor, but Stephen Dartnell is lovely, and Ilona Rogers does what's asked of her. It's not the best part, but she's a very capable, good actress. So and the quartet are all doing their jobs beautifully, and they all have lovely moments in that. I think Hartnell's on great form. I think they're all great. They all fulfill their roles perfectly, and I do like Carol Ann Ford in these opening installments. I think I seem to recall particularly liking her next week when she gets to do a bit of the, communing psychically with the Sensorites. That brings out that slightly far and distant alienness that she does so well. So all good so far, but so I would choose the atmosphere and the way that the story unfolds. I think they seed the threat of the Sensorites in, subtly and creepily. I think Stephen Dartnell is great as John, and I like the way that he is fed into the story. Again, like the monsters, he seems like he's going to be a threat, but actually, be careful what you make assumptions about, and actually he's somebody that you can feel safe with, even though he's obviously not quite on the same wavelength and is obviously quite damaged, but he's benign. So it's a story about not trusting our instincts to fear or to hate, and that becomes quite important later on. So there's good pieces all being put in place, and they come from a dynamic that seeks to not follow the cliche, even though it's really early in the show's development. We are accustomed to seeing us land and find loads of threatening things and then beat and defeat them. The nature of what is threatening and the motives of those to whom our security and safety is, by whom we are endangered. Carol and Maitland are on our side, but they are held prisoner by these aliens. But as it's going to turn out, they have very good reason for so doing. So it's trying to mix up the way that Doctor Who is done. You can kind of see why David Whittaker, as script editor, might have wanted a story like this if he could see the way that some of the other sort of alien type stories were going. So and isn't it interesting, though, the whole story of Peter R. Newman, and why we don't really know how he particularly got on the radar or sort of back and forth with Whittaker. Nobody from the production team really was asked, or if they were asked, spoke about him. So we don't have their view of him at all. All we have is pretty much what we found in the documentary, and that comes from his family and kind of what we know about what happened to him afterwards. And Marcus Hearn gave us loads of details about when he worked with Hammer. But his actual in and out dealings with the Doctor Who production team, we don't know an awful lot about. And what we have is this rather curious, enigmatic little story that you can see, as I say, what they were driving at, but also we will see things about it that are quite rightly one-offs, and why, and what how they make it form into the to a square peg that doesn't quite fit into the round hole that is required for it to seem like all of that it needs to get through in order to nestle too comfortably next to the rest of the stories of season 1. But again, isn't that part of the charm of watching Doctor Who unfold and seeing where it might have gone or what it might have been? And this is, I certainly think, closer. Well, we'll get to that in later episodes, but closer to the sort of Target Luna, Strangers in Space, Pathfinders serials that Sidney Newman did before Doctor Who on the other side, which are much more childish and much more sort of educational in a not particularly organic way to the storytelling, and very much what Doctor Who could have been, lovely in their under their own terms, but not they don't have that strange brilliance, that indefinable magic of Doctor Who. So. But that's gone a long way around for me to alight on the thing that I said I was probably going to choose when it happened on the screen, and that is the quartet moving from the TARDIS control room into the spaceship in which they've landed in one camera move, and then when we cut round to the other side, we see the exterior of the TARDIS. It's a virtuoso piece of direction, astonishingly never done again in the classic series, I don't think, and really it's original and bold and experimental and successful and surprising and oh wow, they've really done it. So yes, that is my choice. The TARDIS move, the camera moving with the regulars as they move out of the TARDIS set onto the spaceship. I think that has to be my choice for episode 1, with honourable mentions to all those other things that I spoke about, some of which I would hope to choose in later episodes. Because I fear there may be slim pickings come 3, 4, and 5. Who knows, though? I might be surprised. What Steve Lyons, who I also need to talk about, excellent Doctor Who writer, lovely chap, writes with great humour, but is actually, in real life, a very unassuming and softly spoken gentleman. But if you've not availed yourself of his books, well, we'll talk about those in some of the other episodes, I'm sure, because, as I say, I've got to keep my powder dry, because I think I've just used up a good line of it, on episode 1, which is, as I recall, one of the more rewarding parts of the Sensorites. But it started well. Who knows? I may be pleasantly surprised. What has Steve Lyons chosen about episode 1 of the Sensorites?
So episode 1 of the Sensorites, Strangers in Space. And my favourite thing about this episode is a fairly obvious one, I think. It's the shot when we follow the crew out through the TARDIS doors straight into the spaceship. The only time that was done in the classic series. Especially, I like the way that when we cut to the reverse shot with the police box prop in the background, that cut happens in mid-word. I think that really helps to sell the illusion that this could all have been done in one take.
Yeah, it's virtuoso. Well done, Mervyn Pinfield, who, as I say, is too often written off as this sort of stodgy old relic from the old way of doing things. And Steve and I have agreed. So look at that. We've started this. This has been unusual. Of course it has been. It's the Sensorites. Of course it wasn't going to be straightforward. We started with the person who chose it saying that this was going to be a challenge, admitting that they think it's the worst story of the season that it is in, and then going, accentuate the positive on that, Buster. So we've started in an unusual way. We've watched an unusual episode because it's an episode of a story that nobody particularly likes. But those who do like it, those who are inclined to accentuate the positive, tend to be more positive about the first couple of installments than later on. So we have to bear that in mind. The later episodes do loom a little bit ominously. But so it's not an entire surprise that we've had a good time. Well, Steve and I have, I hope you have too, watching and considering episode 1, which is, as I say, atmospheric, unfolds very cleverly, and has a few flourishes that are delightful, including that movement from the TARDIS into the spaceship. As Steve says, it then cuts mid-word. Absolutely brilliant. Even the most humble, strange, untalked about slice of Doctor Who has a moment that is worth our consideration and that shows this fledgling show, trying out different things. And that's the beautiful thing, as I say, about watching this programme evolve. And even more beautifully, what it means is that at the beginning of the Sensorites, episode 1 of the Sensorites, I'm winning. Because I chose the same thing as Steve. Now, this could be promising for me because it is a story of such slim pickings. Maybe, and he did say himself that was a fairly obvious choice because it's such a remarkable moment that even though there's other nice things, you got to choose that really because it never happens again. That I wonder if the pickings are so slim that we'll have no choice but to choose the same things as each other more often than not, which could mean a rare victory for me. And as I was denied one that I could have had in the sister story that we did prior to this, Planet of the Ood, just because the guest hadn't quite grasped the rules, or I hadn't quite explained them well enough, I feel in the mood for victory. And can I sense it about to happen, or do I have a foreboding that it's all going to end rather lamely? Talking of which, that's episode 1 of the Sensorites, Strangers in Space. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope if you've listened to this, maybe it gives you a desire to watch the episode again, or maybe you were watching as you went along, or maybe you were watching in preparation for this. I hope so. I know a lot of you listen to these, just when you're out walking your dog or in the car or whatever, and might not actually give the episode a go. But if you're Sensorites averse, I would say give this episode a go, because you never know, you might be very pleasantly surprised. So anyway, I'm going to get my bald-headed, bearded, stupid old man's face, and I'm going to stick it up next to a window and frighten people. But and then I'll come back next week and do it slightly less effectively. But we've got that to look forward to. In the meantime, enjoy watching the Sensorites if you've chosen so to do. Thanks for joining me here, and thanks to Steve Lyons for being the guest, and I will speak to you next time. Thanks ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Haydock, and my special guest, Steve Lyons, writer of Doctor Who in many different media. Please avail yourself of some of his work. I'm grateful to Steve and to the patrons who make this podcast possible, and they include Paul Carnahan, Paul Carrington, Andy Case, John Curley, Mark Dakin, Rob Dawson, John Elledge, Mark Findlay-Smith, Joe Ford, Gary Gillett, Paul Goodridge, Lisa C. Greco, David Green, Fraser Gregory, Paul Gregory, Michael Harvey, Legion Henderson, Dave Hoskin, Richie Howarth, Robert Jewell, Andrew Jolly, Paul Jones, Andrew Jordan, Christopher Joyce, Jess Jerkovic, Rick King Byatt, Andy Kitching, Ashley Knight, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Lisa and Andrew, Gavin McLean, Steve Manfred, and David Matthewman. The music is by Dave Gates, the artwork by Dylan Patterson. If you would like your name read out on the credits, then please go to patreon.com/Toby Haydock, where it is but one of the many joys you get from sponsoring me. You can do that for as little as £3 a month, and you get advance releases, you get bonus material, you get behind the scenes of my various Blu-ray and DVD documentaries and commentaries and other things, pictures of my dog, and monthly AMAs that are exclusive and nice little chats. It's a nice place to hang out. Benign and cheerful, and there's lots of lovely people there. So that's patreon.com/Toby Haydock. If you can't be bothered with any of that, and there's no blame to be attached for that, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Haydock if you want to occasionally support these in the way that people want to do these days, and I'm very grateful to those that do. If you are unable or unwilling to do the financial side of things, and that is perfectly understandable too. I listen to loads of podcasts that I thoroughly enjoy that I don't financially support because they are free at the point of contact, and I am mostly grateful to anybody who just listens, to be honest, because that makes it worthwhile, and I love the fact that there's an audience out there. But if you are an appreciative audience, I would be really grateful if you could show that appreciation by giving these 5 stars wherever you get your podcasts, and perhaps leaving a few lines of review that just help to tart up the algorithms and make people wolf whistle them as they pass. I'm on all the social medias, Twitter, sometimes called X. By the time this goes out, I don't know what it'll be called. It's my ex-Twitter, and that's at Haydock Podcasts for these podcasts, at Toby Haydock just for me. I've got a Facebook page. I've also got Instagram at toby.haydock, and my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, which is every Tuesday in Manchester, is at Excess Malarkey on all of the various social media platforms. So I'd be grateful if you could check those out too, because I'm not just all about the Doctor Who, you know. So there we are. Well, we nearly got I'm looking at this, 53 minutes, just over 53 minutes. I suppose it'll be slightly longer once the music's added, about part 1 of the Sensorites. I got a feeling the things I have to say might dwindle. I as soon as I looked at the fact that the introduction had gone on 8 minutes, I kind of thought, I might have let the horse bolt a little early here, because I might be really struggling when we get to episodes 4 and 5. But let's see why I have got to go into this optimistically. It's better to travel, hopefully, than to arrive, isn't it? Particularly than to arrive at episodes 4 or 5 of the Sensorites. Or is it? Maybe there will be things I will discover anew, because that's what I've often found with Happy Times and Places. And there's certainly lots to talk about, isn't there? So there we go. Well, I better go and do all of the various other things I've got to do today. But thanks for listening, and do check out Steve's books. They're excellent, but I'll be talking about those, I'm sure, probably during episodes 4 and 5.